Now, as the election approaches, figures measuring the country's economic performance will be cherry-picked as the campaigning intensifies. So, does South Africa have the worst unemployment rate in the world? And which of the figures are more relevant? Well, it appears to boil down to what's being measured and how it's being measured. Earlier, I spoke to Kate Wilkinson of Africa Check on exactly how numbers should be read. So, Kate, I suppose let's start with the differences in the official and unofficial unemployment rates. And I suppose I'm asking this because as we head to the elections, you will get cherry-picking of certain figures. What's the difference?
Absolutely. I think that when the general public thinks about the unemployment rate, we sometimes just think, oh, it's one number. But there are actually two ways in South Africa that the unemployment rate is measured. So the first and official unemployment rate is sometimes called the narrow unemployment rate. And there are three requirements for that. If a person is without work, available for work, and looking for work, they will be unemployed according to that narrow definition. And if we look at the latest statistics we have from the third quarter of last year, we see that 27.1% of the labour force was in that position at the end of last year.
And when we look at the unofficial rate, I mean, often the number of 9.2 or thereabout million people out of work. Percentage terms, I would think that equates to 37% of the workforce not employed. What are they referring to there?
So here, the definition is somewhat relaxed. In this case, two of the requirements are the same. You will be considered unemployed according to the broad or the expanded unemployment rate if you are without work and available for work. But you don't have to be searching for work. And that's why this group of people is sometimes called the non-searching unemployed. And reasons for people not looking for work are varied. Sometimes people have given up hope. They don't think there are jobs in the area, that their skills will be required, or they just don't think that there are jobs out there that they'll be able to find.
Are we the country with the worst unemployment rate in the world?
So in South Africa, we like to talk about ourselves being the worst in a lot of things. We're often told and hear that we have the worst education rate, that we have the worst rape rate in the world. And we do hear quite often that we have the highest or the worst unemployment rate in the world. There are a few caveats before we carry on. The first is that comparing unemployment rates globally isn't always that easy, and that's for a number of reasons. The first is that, like you've seen, South Africa has two definitions for unemployment, and globally countries have slightly different definitions where there's a little difference or a tweak or a requirement is included or excluded. So we're not always comparing the same thing. Secondly, even if we are comparing the same thing, sometimes there's different methodology that's followed, a different sample is selected, questions vary. But those issues aside, we do tend to see South Africa performing pretty badly when it comes to international comparisons of the unemployment rate. And if we look at the widest data set that we have, which is from the International Labour Organization, we see that they had data for nearly 190 countries in 2018. And we see that South Africa had the second highest unemployment rate when it came to countries, territories and areas. So we're not just looking at countries here. And that year, South Africa had an unemployment rate of 27%. And the only area which did worse was actually the occupied Palestinian territory. And that area had an unemployment rate of 30%. But if we look specifically at countries, we'll see that at least in 2018, according to the ILO, we did in fact top the charts.
So we're approaching the elections very soon, and you often hear political parties really talk about the amount of job opportunities that were made available to South Africans. Some political parties point to the actual jobs that were created, and I think it's important for us to understand the difference between the two.
Absolutely. So elections are times to boast, they're times to point to your achievements, but often words are used a little bit fast and loose, and they're flung around with their actual meaning discarded. And when it comes to jobs and work opportunities, they are two very different things. And it's important that politicians use them correctly, and it's equally important that the public understands the terms and how they're used. A work opportunity is not a job. Work opportunities are provided by the Department of Public works through the expanded public works program. And what a work opportunity is a temporary placement that normally lasts a couple of months, where people are given the opportunity to get some form of experience, with the idea being that after that they'll be able to use it to acquire a permanent or full-time job. And between April 2014 and March of this year, 2019, government aimed to actually provide 6 million of these work opportunities. The latest stats that we have are from September last year, and according to that data, 4.3 million of these work opportunities had been provided. So quite a large amount. It's important to note that this doesn't automatically mean that 4.3 million people benefited, because one person can do a number of work opportunities over a period.
Yeah.
But the department has said that they think it's unlikely that they're going to reach that goal this year.
And the other important factor to consider, I suppose, is that those work opportunities aren't necessarily curbing the massive unemployment rate.
So yeah, so what we haven't seen the data for, and what would be interesting to see is whether people who have gone through the expanded public works program have gone on to get permanent jobs. Importantly, it does provide employment, it does provide a form of income, it does give people experience, but it is not job creation in the sense that what the public understands that to be.
Kate, the other issue that often comes up is our highest unemployment rate ever at a particular year and our lowest. Now that becomes somewhat confusing when Stats SA often tells us at what point they start measuring using new models and old ones. So when indeed did we have in this country the highest and lowest unemployment rates?
Yeah, so comparability is quite a big issue, and not just with unemployment. We see a lot of comparisons being drawn by political parties, specifically the ruling party, about improvement or progress since 1994. And data in the early 90s is limited, and the data that there is can be pretty dodgy, so you have to be careful when you're using it. And the same is actually true of unemployment data. If you speak to Stats SA, they'll actually tell you that currently the data that we have is only comparable up to data released from the year 2000. So if we want to look back and see when was the highest and lowest, we can only go back that far. South Africa's highest unemployment rate was recorded in March 2003, when it peaked at 29.3%. And this is the official, so the narrow unemployment rate, which means that the broad unemployment rate would have been higher. And then we reached our lowest unemployment rate in September of 2007, just before the financial crisis, when it got as low as 21%.
Yeah, so indeed, it's safe to say we have seen a worse off unemployment rate previously in this country.
Yeah, it's not much consolation, but it is true.
Kate, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.